What is up, everybody? I'm NoLucksGiven here with your afternoon snap, and today we're going to take a look at the best decks from day one of the Golden Gauntlet 2, and we've got 5 decks that went 7-0 in this event, and the first one that we're going to look at in no particular order, but this was a good jumping off point here because this is the deck that I played in the Golden Gauntlet 2. I did not go 7-0, unfortunately, but I did play a strikingly similar list. I was briefly considering Gorgon just because I do think that Thanos is still everywhere. Gorgon also increasing the costs of the spells from Merlin, which is a new addition that I thought people might be interested in playing. So I do think that Gorgon has a real space in the metagame right now. And actually, so there were no RSM decks that made the top 5 decks that we're going to look at in this video, but I will also briefly take a look at the decks that went 6-1 with you. There's a lot of them, and I won't take a look at the whole field. I guess that would be interesting to also take a look at every single player that's going to be making it day 2, but there's about 40 people that went 6-1. So there are a lot of different deck lists to peruse here, and we are just going to stick to these top 5 in this video. But first off, ongoing Thanos. This is a known quantity. We've seen it before, and notably, ongoing Thanos just goes a little bit above typical Strange Supreme Thanos, which is, I think, hurt a little bit recently, right? With the nerf to Time Stone and Strange Supreme both. This was notably hurt less because it does not play Strange Supreme, but still, I think Strange Supreme Thanos was a pretty solid deck choice. We are going to see a little bit more Thanos in this top 5, but this deck just going a little bit above that and then also not getting as hurt by the nerfs is really aiming to prey on Strange Supreme Thanos specifically. And I'll just speak to myself why I decided to play this deck. I really felt like this was an event where people were going to bring Shang-Chi much more than Enchantress as their tech card of choice, and we did see that. Shang-Chi, the most played card in this event by far, and this deck has no problem dealing with the Shang-Chi. It can deal with it with Cosmo and with the Soul Stone for Thanos specifically, and then otherwise it can deal with it by having a bunch of like 7 power cards at a location or less, and all of its cards getting under the Shang-Chi Mockingbird specifically being 9 power as well. This deck does a pretty reasonable job at dodging what I thought would be the most played card in the event, and was, and still having, I felt like, just enough tech. Now, I put Super Scroll in my version of the deck. Gorgon is the 3rd piece of tech, joining Cosmo and Mobius in this specific build, but really, I found like a lot of the times that's all you really needed. Cosmo can shut down most things that could go over the top of you if you are able to correctly predict them, but Mobius is that big one, just being a sort of catch-all to the Mr. Negative decks that allow them to not do their crazy over-the-top thing, and then Gorgon just a little bit more that still plays into your ongoing game plan, while not being like that crazy disruptive. We're not bringing the Shang-Chi, we're not playing the Enchantress ourselves, of course, but also not playing the Shang-Chi just because a lot of the times this deck can just put out enough power by itself. I have also seen some armor and some Kyera mixed in to try to deal with opposing Killmongers. I should have mentioned this at the start, actually. I will have a video that I edited together that is highlights of my favorite moments from day 1 of this tournament playing with this deck. And Killmonger, I thought of that because I did play against a Killmonger today and I beat it. And Killmonger can certainly be a problem for this deck because all of your stones from Thanos can get destroyed, and you're kind of relying on those stones for Ant-Man, Goliath, and Dazzler to get a lot more value, and of course Spectrum and Blue Marvel to be able to pump all of those stones up. But I think that usually you can find scenarios where the Killmonger doesn't matter that much against you, or just hope to dodge it enough and not get paired up against too many other Killmongers. But I believe the second deck that we are going to look at does include a Killmonger. Yes, it does. So here we have Fudgin playing a Merlin deck, but this is a Misery deck. So we have got some powerful on-reveal abilities that we can repeat here with Misery, notably the Hood. That's the main one. This is almost like the Hood deck, really, with a few ways to clean up the Hood and get that demon value. We can use Merlin's spell to either tuck it back into your deck or refresh it for 2 energy, and this is a brand new card, so let me load up these spells here. Omniversal Presence is just a good skill to have, very flexible, but Once and Future is one of the 2 ways that you can shuffle away your Hood, and the other one is Polymorph, transforming it into a 2-cost card. Those are the main synergies that we got going on with this one. In addition to being able to Misery it and Killmonger it, which can give you a cheaper death. This deck does not go too heavy into realistic ways to grow your own death without destroying some of your opponent's stuff. Really, it's Lady Deathstrike and Killmonger that are trying to destroy your opponent's cards to give you that cheaper death. You can use Lady Deathstrike and Killmonger to eat up the Ice Cube from Luna Snow, of course, but mostly we're hoping to use these to kind of just clear out some stones, so that way we can get a cheap death, and that is the main interaction in this deck. We also have Iron Patriot, which can work well with Misery as a powerful on-reveal card, and we're following up that Iron Patriot with a 5-power Copycat and with a 6-power Luna Snow, in addition to the 6-power Demon that we get off of the Hood. I think that you probably also have to be willing to run out Shadow King and Killmonger early on with this deck to give you some additional polymorph targets for Merlin. And one other thing that I talked about in the previous Golden Gauntlet tournament is the power of Copycat and Iron Patriot in an event like this. Because it is an open deck list tournament, your opponent's going to know all of the cards that you have in your deck, unless of course you are playing with RSM. But Copycat gives a little bit of invisibility to what you are doing, because that could copy any of the 12 plus cards in your opponent's deck. It can copy the stones, and it can also copy their RSM cards, and then also Iron Patriot giving you a random 4, 5, or 6 cost card. Could be a crazy haymaker, and your opponent is going to have tough times playing around the entirety of Marvel Snap, or I guess not the entirety of Marvel Snap, but like half of the cards available in Marvel Snap. Maybe not quite, but still a huge pool of cards that kind of allows you to play, I call them face down threats, that your opponent won't know exactly what's coming. And at the same time, this deck is paired with a bunch of face up threats like Shang-Chi and Lady Deathstrike that might scare them away even if you don't have them. So this deck is also able to attack on both fronts like that, while still offering some interesting synergies and some powerful potential from the newest release. Speaking of the newest release, we also have a deck featuring both Merlin and Mercury, which is a new combo with Cannonball. If you are not already familiar with it, I'll bring it up here on the big screen. Mercury says, enemy cards here can't move as part of its ongoing ability, and Cannonball tries to move away the highest power card, but if it can't, you destroy it with a rock. So with that, you will just always get to destroy your opponent's most powerful card at that location with a rock, and then that is being supplemented here with a Athena package that includes Elsa Bloodstone, Angela, and Luna Snow, as well as Galacta and Kitty Pryde to tie it all together. This is definitely a bit of a brew. I've seen some other builds of this deck. I've seen some Quicksilver versions of this deck. We'll talk about that in just a second as well. But this one is just going, oh, again, and here is an Enchantress, not a Shang-Chi. So we do see one player choosing to go for that, as an Enchantress stops things that are going to go like way over the top of you, but Cannonball could deal with things in the same way that a Shang-Chi can, so Cannonball kind of acting like a Shang-Chi. Professor X is an interesting one in this list. Now, where it is pretty good is you can still grow Athena behind a Professor X. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Cannonball Professor X used to be a really nasty combo. Now, cards can move into a Professor X locked down location, so it's not quite the combo that it once was, but this deck is just using Professor X as sort of a random way to spike wins in locations that your opponent might not be expecting. And then also Jeff making a surprise return. We have not seen Jeff at the top end of competitive Marvel Snap in a little bit, but Jeff is back and can be played into the Professor X location, of course. Also, Mercury can move into the Professor X location. That's still possible on the final turn of the game if you need to get a few more points there. Professor X is kind of an interesting one in an open deck list format. I typically think of Professor X as sort of a closed deck list format card, because it can just randomly get an 8-cube win, or at the very least a 4-cube win, I should say, when your opponent is not expecting it. However, in an open deck list tournament, I think Professor X can still do some work at sort of scaring your opponent in the same way that I brought it up with Shang-Chi previously, because your opponent is going to see that Professor X and fear that Professor X even when it is not necessarily about to come down. So all of that together, we have got a pretty solid deck. There is not that much in terms of Merlin food in this deck, I will say. Really just like the Ice Cube from Luna Snow, and then maybe like Kitty Pryde or Mercury, but none of those are really providing insane value for Merlin, I would say. So it's a little bit weaker than potentially the previous Merlin deck that we looked at, just in terms of ability to polymorph, or I believe it's called once and future away your specific Merlin trash. So this deck from Pib Extra here is playing it a little bit looser with Merlin, but can still use Merlin to activate Thena. It's kind of interesting too to see it played alongside Thena, just because the Merlin cards are so cheap and don't really have a huge impact on the board, but still, like on turn 3, being able to play Athena plus a Merlin spell is reasonable, and it kind of gives you another repeatable 1-cost card in addition to your Kitty Pryde. One other deck using that same combo comes from 785 CM here, and this was actually a thought that I had when I saw everyone running this Quicksilver build of basically this same type of strategy, except without Thanos and Mockingbird and Strange Supreme, and instead running Quicksilver, and then, I'm not even sure what else makes up that deck, but Merlin made up that deck, certainly, and Quicksilver was like the main card that you would trash away with your Merlins, but this deck is just saying, I'm going to curve out with my Wiccan and Thanos, because that is a tried and true method. Still getting to run that Strange Supreme, also playing the Copycat, and then not only Shang-Chi and Enchantress, but also including Cannonball and then Fenris Wolf, and having both Shang-Chi and Cannonball as ways to feed the hungry wolf here, with Mercury supporting the Cannonball. I think that this is a pretty strong look for this deck. And one of the cool things that Wiccan does, I don't actually think, we saw Wiccan in the ongoing Thanos, but this is our first time seeing Wiccan with the Cannonball Mercury combo, and 7 energy on turn 5 with the +2 from Wiccan allows you to drop Mercury and Cannonball in the same turn, which I think is a really powerful angle. We still see the Cosmo and the Mobius shared from the ongoing list, and then instead of all of those other ways to create power, we just have a bunch of disruptive elements with, of course, Fenris Wolf as a nice way to steal that power from your opponent. And our last undefeated deck from day one of this tournament takes it in a totally different way. I knew that we did have one other Fenris Wolf deck coming, but I forgot exactly what it was going to be. So interestingly, we see Captain Marvel and Vision coming into a Mercury metagame, but this is big Thanos, for lack of something else to call it. This is a deck that leans pretty heavily on Surge, but interestingly does not lean on Wiccan at all. I do think that Galacta plus Thanos has been an underexplored combo, because those stones allowing you to just easily play a card to the other locations that Galacta isn't, allows you to get some nice cheap value out of Galacta while not committing that much. Like if you play Galacta and then you follow that up with a Vision the next turn, well, that's actually also not that bad, and because both of these cards can move. Let's think of another card. Let's say you followed up with your 5-cost Thanos, made cheaper from Time Stone, and you play Galacta in another location. You are now slamming down 15 points into one location. That can sometimes be overkill. That is oftentimes overkill. And Galacta kind of mitigates that, and it's a bad example to say Thanos specifically, but I just wanted to look at a card that was in front of me so I'd have an easy card to say. Galacta mitigates that, or I'm sorry, Thanos mitigates that with the stones, because now you could just play the stone and then Captain Marvel. Now, this exact example is a little bit awkward again, but maybe like Gladiator. Maybe you play 2 stones and a Gladiator on turn 5, and that way you don't have a Shang-Chi-able Gladiator, which would otherwise be a problem in a non-Galacta deck. So, in addition to the Wiccan, or I would say instead of the Wiccan is what I mean to say, we have Hope Summers in this deck as the ramp card of choice, which also has some really nice synergy with the stones, allowing you to play them at Hope Summers' location to get some of these bigger threats out on the board. We have not seen a Thanos curve this high in a while. We have seen it before. Lockjaw Thanos used to be a really popular archetype, but now we have Alioth, Red Hulk, Thanos, and Vision all at the top of the curve, with not even a Mockingbird in sight, which is pretty interesting. I feel like Mockingbird would still be reasonable in this deck, but Red Hulk is what Jonathan decided to go with. One other thing that I did want to touch on, so Surge is good with the stones as well, allowing you to just play those stones for free and then try to get cheaper threats that you can play if Surge is able to hit the Red Hulk or the Vision or the Alioth to play these slightly earlier as well. The one cool thing that I also noticed, sometimes you get a bunch of value out of Hope Summers and you're appreciative of the energy, but you wind up losing the Hope Summers location because you decide that you need to get the energy before the final turn, which means that you're filling that location before the final turn. This deck does have some other ways around that with Vision and Captain Marvel, but also Strange Supreme to be able to eat your stones. So that is another cool interaction. It's a little bit light on ways to cheat out cards with Fenris Wolf, relying solely here on Shang-Chi and Gladiator. But that might just be enough, especially in some matchups. You typically want to play Fenris Wolf in a location where you're not going to Shang-Chi, and if your opponent is playing like a Surtur deck or something, then you'll know exactly where you'll want to set up, and you don't need to get multiple cards destroyed to have Fenris Wolf work. You only need to kill one thing, so this can still definitely get it done. Here are all of the deck lists from day one of the event, and I'm not going to go through all of these, all of the winning deck lists, because everyone that went 6-1, there were about 40 of them. Maybe we could go through these real quick, but there's a lot of them. And then 5-2, it's probably similar, if not, yeah, double that. Okay, that's a lot. So all of these players will be making day 2 of the event. That's probably too many 140 to go over in a single video, but it could be interesting to do just sort of like a metagame breakdown going into day 2. Maybe I'll do something like that. But I did look at all of the 6-1 deck lists myself, and we can probably get through that a little bit quicker. There's about 40 of them. Honestly, almost every archetype was represented, including a bunch of different varieties of Arishem as well. One really interesting version of Arishem, let me see if I can find that. And then one other thing that I thought was really interesting. Yeah, here's the interesting version of Arishem. Hulk, High Evolutionary. Hulk is the only high Evo card in this deck, but so that actually is kind of an interesting synergy. Basically, I mean, high Evo, it's fine now. It's a 4/7. It's nothing to get super crazy about. But if you think that there is a good high Evo card and you want to play it in your Arishem deck, the chances of drawing your High Evolutionary are lower than they would be in a typical Arishem deck, so you can get away with it a little bit more. But the main combo going on here is Blob plus Arnim Zola, and Arnim Zola Blob will potentially wind up eating that Hulk a reasonable portion of the time. It will just be a 12 power Hulk, but that will result in some bigger blobs. And that is a nice sort of combo to go over the top when you're not expecting your opponents to Shang-Chi you. And then Shang-Chi, Galacta, and Enchantress, with also Super Scroll on the top of it, and then Loki as a interesting, like I'm trying to think on the final turn, if you play Loki and then you Arnim Zola your blob, you can do that for 7 energy. I'm not sure if that's good, but in open deck lists, you'll know if that is a reasonable play that you want to make or not. Maybe against like the Surtur decks, that could be a crazy way to go over the top of your opponent. What else do we have here that we want to talk about? That's what I was going to say. Almost everything I found was represented in these decks. A lot of the Mercury Surge Merlin deck, with though these ones both with Kitty Pryde, actually, not with, yeah, okay, so these are both similar to the deck that we just looked at there. I guess that was the build that more players decided on. No Professor X in this build, instead opting for Eliath. This is the build that I thought was going to be the most popular, Quicksilver with a Wiccan Curve, and then also with Kate Bishop as more food for Merlin. I thought that seemed like a pretty reasonable angle to take, or just play it alongside Thanos and get all the stones and their value out of it. I do think that that's pretty reasonable. So one thing not represented in all of this top 40, I'm curious how many even will be making it on to day 2, but that is going to be War Machine. I did not see a single War Machine player. There were 20 of them, and the top one did go 5-2. How about after that? 2, 3, so a few of them did make it 5-2. We will see. No, actually only 3 of them. Well, let's see which builds of War Machine in fact made it in. This is a card that I thought was going to see a lot more play than it ultimately did. And the first one is a She-Hulk Infinite variant, so that, oh, it's actually a little bit of Clog too, with Debris Viper. Interesting. And then we have, wait, did that one even have Legion? Oh, this is not even a Legion deck. Okay, let's not even count it. This is the first one that we are seeing with the combo. Jennifer Kale. That's kind of crazy. And then the Infinite on the top of the curve, and also Infinity Ultron. But Jennifer Kale, that's really curious. And then the last War Machine combo is going to be this one right here. And I know you guys can't see everything that's on the screen. That's why I'm saying some of it out loud. This one looks pretty similar. But also gets a little bit lower to the ground with Hope Summers and Angela. Wait, which one was it? I lost it, sorry. It's this one here. Okay, yeah, so Angela, Surge, Zabu, and Kitty Pryde even a lot lower to the ground. That is pretty interesting. And then I can't help but notice Uatu the Watcher making it into day 2. So definitely some interesting lists. I did see a lot of move bounce as well while scrolling through. You can kind of get an idea of what most people are playing just by looking at the first card. If you see Aranya, if you see Surge, some of them are a little bit tricky. You got to go a little bit further to see if they are Silver Surfer decks or not. But we also have a card breakdown where we can see the win rate of every card. And I took a look at War Machine because I was curious that War Machine was not doing so hot. War Machine, 48%, right under that 50%. The best card, I mean, Lockjaw, I don't know if you can really count it because one player played it and they went 2-1 drop. So maybe let's hide Lockjaw from the data here, but some of the best cards that really have some numbers behind them. I am curious about some of these cards that only a handful of people were playing, but some of the cards that really have like over 20 people playing them were these move bounce cards, and pretty good results across the board. We can see most of these players doing pretty well with them, and on this version of the deck specifically, like I have seen some other people trying different versions of move that sometimes cut Human Torch and sometimes cut Beast and Toxin, but these cards being the best performers let you know that Move Bounce is certainly probably one of the best performing archetypes as a whole. I'm curious about this Yellow Jacket. I feel like, well, the Lockjaw player may have been playing it, but otherwise, is that just like Merlin food in like junk Merlin decks where like you're potentially trying to Viper over the hood as a different way to get rid of it? Oh, it's a 0 that triggers Werewolf by Night in this deck. How about in this one? I am seeing a lot of other on reveal cards. Is this also a Werewolf by Night deck? It is, that also plays Viper, Sentry, and Annihilus. So like using Yellow Jacket to shrink the Hood or the Void from Sentry, those are really interesting plays. This one looks to be about the same to me. Yeah, Werewolf by Night, Sentry, Annihilus. They're behind me here, but I can... Where was it? Oh, it's right here. Cool. I just scrolled it off the screen, but Sentry, Annihilus. Right there. There we go. I'll have to remember to scroll all the way over. And then this last one. Yeah, I did think about this last second that Mysterio does seem like a cool way to some cool Merlin food. But this deck is not actually playing Merlin. Oh, never mind. Is this another Werewolf by Night Viper deck? No Werewolf by Night in this one, but still playing Yellow Jacket. I mean, this was not a high-ranking player. This player went 4-3, and then we did have 2 players go 6-1 with Yellow Jacket. So still some definite presence from Yellow Jacket. Half of the players that played it went 6-1. That seems pretty good to me. What else? Anything? Oh yeah, there was a bunch of Symbiote Spider-Man, some Invisible Woman. That's just kind of a fairly straightforward tech card. Both Beta Ray Bill players doing reasonable with that. I will leave a link to this spreadsheet in the video description, and if there's anything that you think is notable, feel free to let me know in the comments, and maybe we will see some of that stuff do well on day 2 of the event as well. But for today, that is going to be it for me. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'm NoLucksGiven. Peace.